Hi, I'm going to be reading to you Catching Fire Chapter 2, and if you go on the related side of the search, you can see more of Chapter 3, 4, and so on. Well, let's get started on Chapter 2. Here we go. In my mind, President Snow should be viewed in front of marble pillars hung with oversized flags. It's jeering to see him surrounded by the ordinary objects in the room, like taking the lid off a pot and finding a fanged viper instead of stew. What could he be doing here? My mind rushes back to the opening days of the victory tours. I remember seeing the winning tributes with their mentors and stylists. Even some high government officials have made appearances occasionally, but I've never seen President Snow. He attends celebrations in the capital. Period. If he's made the journey all the way from his city, it can only mean one thing. I'm in serious trouble. And if I am, so is my family. A shiver goes through me when I think of the proximity of my mother and sister to this man who despises me. Will always despise me. Because I outsmarted his sadistic Hunger Games, made the capital look foolish, and consequently undermined his control.
All I was doing was trying to keep PETA and myself alive. Any act of rebellion was purely coincidental. But when the capital decrees that only one tribute can live and you have the audacity to challenge it, I guess that's a rebellion in itself. My only defense was pretending that I was driven insane by a passionate love for PETA. So we were both allowed to live, to be crowned victors, to go home and celebrate and wave goodbye to the cameras and now be left alone. Until now.
Perhaps in the newness of the house, or the shock of seeing him, or the mutual understanding that he could have killed me in a second, that makes me feel like the intruder. As if this is his home and I'm in the uninvited party. So I don't welcome him or offer him a chair. I don't say anything. In fact, I treat him as if he's a real snake, the venomous kind. I stand motionless, my eyes locked on him, considering plans of retreat. I think we'll make this whole situation a lot simpler by agreeing not to lie to each other, he says. What do you think? I think my tongue was frozen and speech will be impossible. So I surprise myself by answering back in a steady voice. Yes, I think that would save time.
President Snow smiled, and I noticed his lips for the first time. I'm expecting snake lips, which is to say none. But his are overly full, the skin stretched too tight. I have to wonder if his mouth has been altered to make him more appealing. If so, it was a waste of time and money, because he's not appealing at all. My advisors were concerned you would be difficult, but you're not planning on being difficult, are you? He asks.
No, I answer. That's what I told them. I said any girl who goes to such lengths to preserve her life isn't going to be interested in throwing it away with both hands. And then there's her family to think of. Her mother, her sister, and all those cousins. By the by the way, he lingers on the word cousins. I can tell he knows that Gail and I don't share a family tree. Well, it's all on the table now. Maybe that's better. I don't do well with ambiguous threats. I'd much rather know the score.
Let's sit. President Snow takes a seat at the large desk of polished wood where Prim does her homework and my mother her budgets. Like our home, this is a place that he has no right, but ultimately every right, to occupy. I sit in front of the desk on one of the carved straight-backed chairs. It's made for someone taller than I am, so only my toes rest on the ground. I have a problem, Miss Everdeen, says President Snow. A problem that began the moment you pulled out those poisonous berries in the arena.
That was the moment when I guessed that if the game makers had to choose between watching PETA and me commit suicide, which would mean having no victor, and letting us both live, they would take the latter. If the head game maker, Seneca Crane, had any brains, he'd have blown you to dust right then. But he had an unfortunate sentimental streak. So here you are. Can you guess where he is? He asked. I nod because, by the way he says it, it's clear that Seneca Crane has been executed. The smell of roses and blood has grown stronger now that only a desk separates us. There's a rose in President Snow's lapel, which at least suggests a source of the flower perfume, but it must be genetically enhanced because no real rose reeks like that. As for the blood, I don't know.
After that, there was nothing to do but let you play out your little scenario, and you were pretty good too, with the love-crazed schoolgirl bit. The people in the capital were quite convinced. Unfortunately, not everyone in the districts fell for your act, he says. My face must register at least a flicker of bewilderment, because he adjusts it. This, of course, you don't know. You have no access to information about the mood in other districts. In several of them, however, people viewed your little trick with the berries as an act of defiance, not an act of love. And if a girl from District 12 of all places can defy the capital and walk away unharmed, what is to stop them from doing the same? He says. What is to prevent, say, an uprising?
It takes a moment for his last sentence to sink in. Then the full weight of it hits me. There have been uprisings. I ask, both chilled and somewhat elated by the possibility. Not yet, but they'll follow the course of things doesn't change. And uprisings have been known to lead to revolution. President Snow rubs a spot over his left eyebrow, the very spot where I myself get headaches. Do you have any idea what that would mean? How many people would die? What conditions those left would have to face? Whatever problems anyone may have with the capital, believe me when I say that if it released its grip on the districts for even a short time, the entire system would collapse.
I'm taken aback by the directness and even the sincerity of the speech, as if his primary concern is the welfare of the citizens of Panama, when nothing could be further from the truth. I don't know how I dare to say the next words, but I do. It must be very fragile if a handful of berries can bring it down. There's a long pause while he examines me. Then he simply says, "It is fragile, but not in the way that you suppose." There's a knock at the door, and the capital man sticks his head in. "Her mother wants to know if you want tea."
I would. I would like tea, says the president. The door opens wider and there stands my mother, holding a tray with china tea set and she brought to the seam when she married. Set it here, please. He places his book on the corner of the desk and pats the center. My mother sets the tray on the desk. It holds a china teapot and cups, cream and sugar, and a plate of cookies. They are beautifully iced with softly colored flowers. The frosting work can only be pitas. What a welcome sight. You know, it's funny how often people forget that presidents need to eat too. President Snow says charmingly. Well, it seems to relax my mother a bit anyway. Can I get anything else? I can cook something more substantial if you're hungry, she offers.
"No, this could not be more perfect, thank you," he says, clearly dismissing her. My mother nods, shoots me a glance, and goes. President Snow pours tea for both of us and fills his with cream and sugar, then takes a long time stirring. I sense he has had his say and is waiting for me to respond. "I didn't mean to start any uprisings," I tell him. "I believe you. It doesn't matter. Your stylist turned out to be prophetic in his wardrobe choice. Katniss Everdeen, the girl who was on fire, you have provided a spark that, left unattended, may grow to be inferno that destroys Panem," he says.
Why don't you just kill me now? I blurt out. Publicly? He asks. That would only add fuel to the flames. Arrange an accident, then? I say. Who would buy it? He asks. Not you. If you were watching, then you tell me what you want me to do. I'll do it, I say. If only if only it were that simple. He picks up one of the floured cookies and examined it. Lovely. Your mother made these? Peta. And the first time it I find I can hold his gaze. I reach for my tea, but set it back down when I hear the cup rattling against the saucer. To cover, I quickly take a cookie. "Peeta, how is the love of your life?" he asks. "Good," I say. "At what point did he realize the exact degree of your indifference?" he asks, dipping his cookie in the tea. "I'm not indifferent," I say, "but perhaps not as taken with the young man as you would have the country believed," he says. "Who says I'm not?" I say. "I do," says the president, "and I wouldn't be here if I were the only person who had doubts. How's the handsome cousin?"
I don't know. I don't. My revolution at this conversation, at discussing my feelings for two of the people I care most about with President Snow, chokes me off. "Speak, Miss Everdeen. Him I can kill easily off if we won't come to a happy resolution," he says. "You aren't doing him a favor by disappearing into the woods with him each Sunday. If he knows this, what else does he know? And how does he know it? Many people could tell him that Gale and I spend our Sundays hunting. Don't we show up at the end of each one loaded down with game? Haven't we for years? The real question is what he thinks goes on in the woods beyond District 12. Surely they haven't been tracking us in there. Or have they? Could we have been followed? That seems impossible, at least by a person. Cameras. That never crossed my mind until this moment. The woods have always been our place of safety, our place beyond the reach of the capital, where we're free to say what we feel, be who we are, at least before the games. If we've been watched since, what have they seen? Two people hunting, saying treacherous things against the capital? Yes. But not two people in love, which seems to be President Snow's implication. We are safe on that charge. Unless.
It only happened once. It was fast and unexpected, but it did happen. After Peter and I got home from the games, it was several weeks before I saw Gale alone. First, there were the obligatory celebrations, a banquet for the victors that only the most high-ranking people were invited to, a holiday for the whole district with free food and entertainers brought in from the capital. Partial Day, the first of 12 in which food packages were delivered to every person in the district. That was my favorite. To see all those hungry kids in the seam running around waving cans of applesauce, tins of meat, even candy. Back home, too big to carry, would be bags of grain, cans of oil. To know that once a month for a year they would all receive another parcel. That's one of the few times I actually felt good about winning the games. So between the ceremonies and events and the reporters documenting my every move as I presented and thanked and kissed Peeta for the audience, I had no privacy at all. After a few weeks, things finally died down. The camera crews and reporters packed up and went home. Peeta and I assumed the cool relationship we have had ever since. My family settled into our house in the Victor's Village, the everyday life of District 12. Workers to the mine, kids to school, resumed into place.
I waited until I thought the coast was really clear, and then one Sunday, without telling anyone, I got up hours before dawn and took off for the woods. The weather was still warm enough that I didn't need a jacket. I packed along a bag filled with special foods, cold chicken and cheese, and bakery bread and oranges. Down at my old house, I put on hunting boots. As usual, the fence was not charged, and it was simple to slip through the woods and retrieve my bow and arrows. I went to our place, Gale's and mine, where we had shared breakfast the morning of the reaping that sent me into the games.
I waited at least 2 hours. I'd begun to think that he's given up on me in the weeks that had passed, or that he no longer cared about me, hated me even. And the idea of losing him forever, my best friend, the only person I've ever trusted with my secrets, was so painful I couldn't stand it. Not one top Not on top of everything else that had happened. I could feel my eyes tearing up, and my throat started to close the way it does when I get upset. Then I looked up and there he was, 10 feet away, just watching me. Without even thinking, I jumped and threw my arms around him, making some weird sound that combined laughing, choking, and crying. He was holding me so tightly that I couldn't see his face. But it was a really long time before he let me go, and then he didn't have much choice because I'd gotten this unbelievably loud case of the hiccups and had to